What we are going to be doing today is running through this high-level presentation. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is just kind of be patient with me. We're going to run through this, and I'm going to leave a hefty amount of time afterward for questions and answers. All right? This is going to be high-level, and it is going to be geared towards the beginner. So if there's a lot of like in-depth, you know, like what is the print settings you recommend for ASA filament, that's a topic for another time. All right, we're going to keep things high-level for the people who are like, I don't even know what this hobby is all about, or I bought a boat, now I don't know what to do. So let's get started. The agenda. We're going to go through some introductions. For those of you who don't know me, we're going to talk about setting your expectations as a new sub skipper. What is this hobby? What is it like to be a skipper? What is it like to own an RC submarine? We're going to run through resources that are available to you to help you in your remote controlled submarine journey. Skill sets that I would recommend that you know or learn before you take this path. Selecting your first boat. What the best ballast system in the whole universe is. We're gonna tell you exactly. We're going to talk about buoyancy, installing your cylinder. We're going to talk a little bit about radios, and then we're going to open it up for the Q&A. I want to keep the Q&A session nice and open so that we can touch on the topics that are important to you guys. My name is Bob Martin. For those of you guys that don't know me, you just saw on social media, you're like, oh, he's doing a presentation. Who is this guy? I'm Bob. They call me the RCSubGuy. I've been building remote-controlled submarines since 1999, which for some people in attendance here is a drop in the bucket, but it's still a considerable amount of time. I've been doing it professionally, i.e. getting paid to do it, since 2008. And since that time, I've lost count. I think I've built over 150 or 155 remote controlled submarines over my time. So I know a little bit about a lot of stuff. So hopefully you'll be able to learn from what I've learned. All right, let's get started here. Before you go down this path, you need to set your expectations, all right? It will be hard. It will take a lot of time, and it will be expensive, okay? We're going to start off with those three. RC submarines are, in my opinion, exponentially harder than airplanes, boats, helicopters. These craft are operating in the most hostile environment known to man. Outer space has absolutely nothing on deep water exploration, all right? And even though we're in scale, and for us it may be as deep as our toes when we're standing in the water, it is still an exceptionally hostile environment to our boats. It is difficult to manufacture, build, operate, maintain, and repair craft that we expect to operate in this environment. It is also time consuming. This is by no stretch of imagination whatsoever like the RC airplane foamy world. You can't just buy it, charge up the batteries, and go to work. This hobby is so small compared to, you know, boats and trucks and cars, that what you are learning has come on the backs of, you know, realistically hundreds of people that have come before you, not hundreds of thousands of people who've come before you. It's going to be expensive. Even if you build it on your own from scratch out of cardboard, toothpicks, and Q-tips, it is still ultimately going to be a very expensive hobby. Get that through your head. This is not going to be the, you know, Chinese 1999 Walmart special. For the most part, it is going to be in the thousands of dollars of investment. Just set your expectations, okay? hobby is small. I think we talked about this before at DiveTribe. I'd say realistically speaking, there's probably somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people worldwide with fully functional, operational RC submarines. So even though I've told you all of this stuff before, if you manage to persevere, you will be part of an elite group of people that have actually managed to create these fully functional remote controlled devices. And a shout out to Rick Teskey. Look at that, 1998. Look at that svelte man with the sea view in the pool. Rick is here today, by the way. You can rib on him once we open up the mics. All right, resources to help. Now, I'm trying not to be like self-plugging on this, but there actually aren't a lot of resources out in the market, and a lot of them have actually been pushed out to myself with the help of a lot of other people. So DiveTribe is a group or a membership with the Nautilus Dry Docks, and basically with the membership, we hang out every 2 weeks and we talk RC submarines. You are not going to find this almost any other place. It's your opportunity to ask questions, to gain information. You'll probably learn more from one session of DiveTribe over the course of an hour than you may from a month of internet research. And I'm not exaggerating. You can ask DiveTribe members. You can participate in those meetings for as little as $10 a month. All right, plug out of the way. Forums. I have forums from the Nautilus Dry Docks that are linked in the top, and those stretch back even before I owned those forums. We're talking decades of archived information, people who built submarines, sourced information, documented builds. It's absolutely invaluable. The same thing exists on the subcommittee website. The subcommittee is an organization focused around submarines, not specifically RC submarines, although they kind of evolved that way. I was the president of the subcommittee for 3 years, and my tenure actually just ended last December. A good organization. The subcommittee report is an absolutely world-class publication. And again, it's like $10 a year for membership. Definitely worth it. If you're talking about spending thousands of dollars on an RC submarine, $10 or $20 per year is not a massive investment. If you haven't already seen it, downloaded it, and or purchased and opened it, Diving Deep is a book that I wrote a couple of years ago for the beginner in mind. It's just a high-level overview of the RC submarine hobby. On my website, it's linked in the big pictures in the middle and on the top, both hard copy and digital PDF format. YouTube's a pretty good resource as well, although I would say, as a rule, there's exceptions, but as a rule, most of the participants in this hobby tend to be a little longer in the tooth than the average person. And so for the most part, they're not as technologically adept as perhaps in a lot of other hobbies. And so posting videos to YouTube is not as common a thing as maybe in some other hobbies, but there are a ton of resources out there on YouTube. If you want to check it out, I think I've got about over 700 videos that I've posted that you guys can feel free to check out. And then last but not least, there's also consult time. If you are really in the weeds or you just need some concentrated one-on-one time, I do offer that. You can get that through my website, and you'll have my undivided attention for however long you want to book it for. So the resources are out there, but they are few and far between. Just understand that that is the case. It is very, very rare that you are going to buy an RC submarine kit, part, component that has fully detailed step-by-step video walkthrough instructions that will take you from the beginning to the end. This is going to be a battle, but it'll be a worthwhile. All right, what do you need? That is he who must not be named, David Merriman III. You look just as good now as you did back then, Dave. More than anything else, and I am going to beat this through your skulls, okay? If you are going to succeed at this hobby, you need to be passionate about it. If you're coming in and saying, oh, it'd be kind of cool if I had an RC submarine, you are going to fail 100%. But if you find submarines to be, like I do and many other people, one of the most amazing creations ever forged by the hand of man, or you're passionate about history, or you're passionate about, fantasy, the Nautilus or Seaview, you will have a much better chance of succeeding in this path than you will if you're just like, oh, it'd be kind of cool if I had an RC submarine. Like I said, it's going to be hard. You are going to take 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but you'll eventually get there. All right? People who succeed in this hobby are also detail-oriented. You cannot slap something together and expect it to work. I don't know how many times I've taken incomplete projects that were held together with duct tape and silicone because people just did not take the time to build something properly. You have to be willing to research. It is going to be frustrating. You're not going to know where to go or what to do. Just take a step back, reach out, do your research, and the answers will come. The last 2 I'm going to say are not necessarily a need, but a definite, absolute want. If you've got a modicum of RC experience, you are going to be light years ahead of where I was back in 1999, who was just like, oh, it'd be kind of cool if I had an RC submarine. This is why I'm speaking from experience here, people. If you can understand, what's a radio? What's a servo? How are they connected? What voltage do they work off of? You'll be light years ahead of having to learn all of that, plus everything else that you need to know. Likewise, electrical, basic soldering skills. Do you understand DC voltage? Can you understand, battery technology and the number of cells and how that relates to voltage and amperage draw? All of this is going to be very, very, very helpful to you. And this is the kind of thing, like that stuff, basic RC and basic electrical, all of that has a bajillion videos on YouTube. That is the kind of thing that you can just pick at, in your free time. Selecting your first boat. Okay, here's that word, passionate again. You see that? You see what I did there? Passionate. If you're just getting a boat because it was cheap, or happened to be on eBay and you just kind of grabbed it, again, odds are not exceptionally good that you're going to succeed in the build out. If you served on a boat and you want a model of it, if you grew up, with the Nautilus from 1954, if you love the role that the, U.S. fleet boats played in World War II, you will have a much easier time allocating the attention and resources to building out the boat than it would be otherwise. The other thing that you need to understand, and I've had a lot of people leave the hobby because of this, is there a venue that you're going to be able to run your boat in? Unlike cars, you can't just open the door and throw it out on the pavement and drive around. You need to have an adequate body of water to operate your craft in, be that a swimming pool in your backyard or a public swimming pool that you have access to, or a reflecting pond, a lake. Something like that needs to be in close-ish proximity in order for you to really enjoy this hobby, okay? Are you forging new ground? So I think what I meant about this is, for your first boat, you don't want to be inventing the wheel for the first time, okay? You'll see a lot of projects on YouTube that are super cool, like an RC Star Trek Enterprise flying underneath the water. Oh man, I'm gonna build that for my first submarine. No, you're not. You are not gonna do that. Come on, let's be real. You are gonna be forging new ground without the requisite experience and knowledge needed to make that happen. Don't go down that path, okay? You may be passionate about it, but let's be realistic here, okay? Pick something that has been done before. The most important thing is to get a success under your belt, all right? You need to understand how these things work, and then you can start doing the cool stuff, right? A little bit here, a little bit there, add some more features, then you're going. Plastic versus fiberglass versus 3D printing. So there are a lot of really excellent cost-effective options out there from companies such as Trumpeter, Revell of Germany, Bronco, Mobius models. There are some great options out there that will allow you to enter the hobby in a more cost-effective manner than springing for a $1,000 museum quality fiberglass hull, okay? Just be aware, these plastic model kits, typically styrene, injection molded, have their own challenges. They were never intended for RC operation. They're going to be more delicate and more difficult to work with than fiberglass and resin. So just bear that in mind, but they are excellent candidates. And for the most part, there are actually a lot of resources out there that will help you because other people have done these conversions, and there's actually a pretty good library of past projects out there that people have documented on the forums, for example, where you can follow step by step as they go through the process. Fiberglass hulls are kind of really still the gold standard for the real serious RC Submariner. Fiberglass is a very robust material that has the opportunity of rendering amazing detail. And this could be everything from the little, 196 Small World Models blueback kit, all the way up to the big museum quality 132nd Type 7 kit from OTW. A huge spectrum of kits, but they're going to be more expensive. They are labor intensive to produce, okay? If you find one for less than $300 or $400, it probably is something you want to steer clear of. Anything less than that amount means that somebody did not take the time needed to properly lay that kit up. You get what you pay for, all right? Let's just put it at that. 3D printing is obviously rapidly becoming a massive tool in the arsenal for RC Submariners. 3D printing has been around since the 1970s, but has really just kind of taken off in the last 10 years. There's a lot of 3D printers out there that can be had for between $300 and $500 that will do an excellent job in printing out a 3D printed hull for you. Just bear in mind that it too has advantages and disadvantages. You should, not only will you be learning the hobby of RC submarines, but you may be having to learn the hobby of 3D printing as well. So just bear that in mind. The neat thing about the 3D printing, there's a huge library of files out there. I mean, I think I've got dozens and dozens on my website, and there's hundreds more out there too if you search them. Almost anything that you can think of can probably be found or commissioned by talented digital artists to get you what you want to build. Build it or buy it. This is one of the biggest questions that people have. And what I mean by that is, do you build, from scratch, from the very, very beginning, going through every step, learning as you go, and then get your first submarine from that? Or do you just buy your first submarine? Somebody else built it and you just buy it from them. You're like, oh yeah, well, this is great. You jump right into the hobby and I'll be in the water on Monday. Advantages and disadvantages. Now I'm speaking from experience in saying that I would not recommend buying somebody else's problems, okay? A lot of times I buy, quote, RPR submarines from people that end up taking me weeks of rework to fix and get working properly. And that's with decades of experience under my belt. You never know what you're going to get. Now, if you've seen the guy and you've seen him run the boat and you know he does good work, that's one thing. But if you're buying it off of eBay or, Facebook Marketplace, you do not know what you're going to get. Just expect that whatever it is going to be exponentially worse than what you're expecting to receive. I'm just talking to you real talk right now, okay? Another option that a lot of people have done, and obviously the way that I make some money, is to commission a build from a professional builder. There's not a lot of us out there. The only thing that's good about that is typically you'll know what you're going to get, and there's a degree of accountability because they have a reputation to uphold, and if they do a bad job, they're never going to build another boat again. So that's an option out there, but just to be prepared, that comes at a price. So you may be saving time, but you will be paying for it in dollars. The last thing, I love talking about this. How many of you, show of hands, for your first boat, you want bow thrusters, torpedoes, missiles, periscopes, lights, sonar, all of that, right? It's going to be awesome. And you're willing to make it happen. You know you can do it, right? Yeah. Lloyd's shaking his head. Good job, Lloyd. Set your expectations immediately. For every feature that you add to your build, you're exponentially increasing the odds that you're never, ever, ever going to finish it. And if you do, there's an exponential increase that any number of those features will be broken, non-functional, and keep your boat on the bench when it should be in the water. What do you need? Throttle, rudder, dive planes, and ballast. That is all you need, okay? If you really want to get fancy, you can put lights in it, okay? But let's not go crazy with operational scopes and rotating masts and torpedo launchers and all of this stuff, okay? For your first boat, keep it simple, stupid. KISS principle, okay? I have no problem if you want to allocate the possibility of adding these features later. You can build it accordingly, but don't stress about it for your first boat, okay? I have spoken. The best ballast system. Okay, before we go any further, I want to talk quickly about this idea of dry hull versus wet hull boats. So back in the day, in the 70s and the 80s, when the first RC submarines were being built out of like vacuum tubes and transistors by talented people in their backyards, all the boats were dry hulls. So basically what I mean by that is they're built almost like the real submarine. The whole inside of the hull is dry, hence the name dry hull. The disadvantage to that is typically you've got acres and acres of real estate that you need to seal because you've got these gigantic big, plates or doors on the top that you need to seal with about 158,000 nuts or bolts to bolt everything down with. The other disadvantage to that, so access obviously is a problem. The other disadvantage to that is that a dry hull boat has a tremendous amount of buoyancy. It's displacing a tremendous amount of water. So this submarine is going to weigh about 2 metric tons out of the water, which makes it difficult to transport, makes it difficult to store, it makes it difficult to launch, it makes it difficult to retrieve. Just bear that in mind. Now, Engel still manufactures some dry hull boats, namely like their Typhoon kit is a good one there. But they have since sort of evolved. I guess it is still kind of dry hull boats, just more cylindrical in nature. The other option is what's called a wet hull. And a big shout out to David Merriman, who commercialized, at least in North America, for sure. Well, no, on the world stage, let's be honest. The idea of a cylinder. So the cylinder is the only thing that is dry and all the rest of the boat floods. So that's the difference between a wet hull and a dry hull boat. So the wet hull, they tend to be lighter because you don't have to offset all of that buoyancy with weights. So talking about specific cylinders, or namely ballast system technologies, I've got a page on my website called You can go to it's under the resources. It's called Ballast System Technology. You can see all the different main types of ballast systems out there. As somebody who has worked with every single one of those systems in the past, I can tell you that no system is perfect, period. You will never, ever, ever get a ballast system that is in all ways perfect. It is all about compromises. Some ballast systems are going to be better at doing some things than other ballast systems are. For example, piston systems. Everybody wants a piston system. Engel did a great job of marketing these piston ballast systems in their boats because they're exceptionally precise. You can hover, you can adjust the trim manually. There's computers in there adjusting everything. But they're massive battery suckers. And you've got a gigantic rod that is plunging in and out of these ballast tanks, and that's taking up room inside your system. Furthermore, you've also got all of the complicated electronics to drive and control the system. But you can hover, you can trim, you know, it's very, very precise. There's advantages to it as well. Gas ballast systems, so insanely simple. Like, it's literally like 3 components. They hardly ever fail, but you got to recharge them. You've got to add liquid gas to the reservoir in order to, surface your boat. It's all about compromises. You need to take a look at these technologies and determine what is important to you. You know, if full static diving is important to you, you're not going to have a low pressure pump system for your boat because you need surface air in order to fully emerge. Take a good look at what your needs are, and from there, you can, based on availability, price, features, determine what ballast system you want to proceed with. And the other thing I'm going to mention about this too, which is a big thing, wherever you get this from, make sure that you feel confident in the support that you're going to receive from the vendor that is supplying it to you. It's one thing for somebody to hand over an exceptionally complicated and expensive piece of hardware to you. It's another one for them to stand behind it and respond to you within 24 hours for any problems or inquiries that you have about it. Okay, just bear that in mind. All right, buoyancy basics. So I think to a certain degree, some people understand this and some people don't. It was touched on a little bit before we started the recording here. Why does something float? An object floats because it displaces an amount of water that weighs more than it does. That's about as simple as I can drill it down to. There's 2 important factors when it comes to your submarine. How much does it weigh and what does it displace? Those are the 2 important factors, okay? If an object displaces an amount of water that weighs less than it does, the object will sink. And if it displaces an amount of water that perfectly equals what it weighs, the object is what we call neutrally buoyant, and it's going to hang out exactly where it is. All right? So, what is the purpose of a ballast system? That's really what we're worrying about right now. The purpose of a ballast system is to change the buoyancy of a submarine. And you're not changing the weight. You're not taking on, more lead while you're driving around in the lake, but you can change the amount of water that it displaces. And that is through the ballast system, all right, by either pumping water or pumping air. The more buoyant something is, the higher it's going to sit in the water. And again, this was mentioned before we got started officially here. boats with a high degree of freeboard, like World War II Gato or a Typhoon, they are going to have exponentially more ballast requirements than a modern submarine. Some modern submarines, like Skipjack or Permit, for example, they might only have 10 or 15% reserve buoyancy, just their backs like a turtle sticking out of the water. So your ballast tank requirements are going to be much, much lower. Now, I'm not going to, because this is a little bit more complicated than like this basic overview. I do have resources on my website under the subdriver section talking about the actual formulas for calculating the volume of your ballast tank, and it's also in my book. All right, we can have a whole different session just on calculating buoyancy. We can go into that, but that's buoyancy at its most basic. All right, so it's not about how much an object weighs, it's a relationship between how much it weighs and what it displaces in the water. Okay. Cylinder installation. Where do you put it? Okay, like say you got a cylinder, like this beautiful unit right in there. That's like a Mark II, no, that could be like a Mark I subdriver from David Merriman. This is what he started manufacturing after his D&E watertight cylinders, which I just saw. Nathan brought over a 3.5 today, Dave, one of your old, like circa 1990 3.5 D&E watertight cylinders. It was pretty cool to see. Well, where do you put it? Like, do you put it all the way forward? Do you put it all the way back? Do you put it on the bottom? Do you put it on the top? Let's talk about this a little bit. And I made a little, oh, what's going on here now? Crazy thing. All right, is this still sharing? Can you see my very cool Los Angeles submarine? Nice. This is a rough rendition, took me about 38 seconds, of a standard nuclear type submarine. And this is a standard-ish watertight cylinder right here, okay? Where do you put it? Do you put it in the middle? Do you put it up near the top? Do you put it forward? Do you put it in the back? All right, does anybody know? Dave, you can't answer, shush. My take on this, you want to put it ideally in the middle of the boat. The ballast tank center should be as close to the center of the boat as you can get it. If you cannot get it in the center of the boat, you want to move it a little bit forward, okay? Either in the middle or slightly forward. Why? Okay, let's think about this. If the ballast tank is directly in the middle over the center of mass of the boat, when this produces a buoyant force going upward like this, it's going to pull the boat upward in a perfectly vertical manner. It's not going to change pitch or anything like that. If you have to cheat it, it actually is kind of a good thing. So let's think about this. Let's say it's slightly forward of center. Okay, maybe this is exaggerated. If the center of the boat is here, but the center of the buoyant force is here, when you dive, the nose is going to go down first. And when you surface, the nose of the boat is going to come up first. This is desirable when we're talking about a submarine. If you put it in the back, it's going to submerge tail first, and it's going to be fighting your dive planes the whole time. And likewise, when you surface, it's going to want to come up tail first, which is not what we want to do. We want to get that nose pointed in the right direction so you can drive it to the surface with your propeller. In terms of vertical alignment, in this particular case, the output shaft right here of the motor is likely in the middle, and that lines up with your propeller. Dang, cool. You could actually run a straight shaft all the way back with a simple coupler. No problem. Sometimes you can't do that for whatever reason, okay? If that's the case, what I prefer to do is to cheat it, if you have to cheat it, down. The reason for that is it's much, much easier to put strips of, 1/4 inch thick lead under the cylinder than it is to try and sliver out little 1/4 inch pieces of styrofoam to fit above. The other thing, you need to think about your surfaced water line. If the water line was here, for example, part of your cylinder is above the water line, which means the poor ballast tank isn't just lifting the boat out of the water. Now it has to lift itself out of the water. You're spinning your wheels. You have a ballast tank that's bigger than it needs to be. So you want to try and, if you have to, cheat that cylinder either in the middle or lower, and definitely not above the surface water line of the boat. Okay? Radio basics. This is a cool picture, by the way. I know some of you know this, but this was actually, he was my first mentor, Greg Sharp, up in Canada. I think this was Beaver Lake, if I'm not mistaken, on Vancouver Island. And the water there was so incredibly crystal clear, you could take a boat on it and see the submerged logs 40 feet under the surface. It was amazing. But what Greg did is he built a waterproof transmitter for his Jules Verne submarine, Nautilus submarine, brought his scuba gear and a lawn chair, sat on the bottom of the lake and drove his submarine around. Like, this is the epitome of RC submarine badassedness right here. Okay, well, oh shoot. Back up. There we go. Radio basics, frequencies. Back in the day, for like forever, low frequency radios were the one and only solution for submarines. Yes, low frequency radio waves penetrate fresh water pretty well, pretty darn well. You'll get 20 feet. I've got, maybe not 30 feet. I've got over 20 feet myself in pure water. Any contaminants such as minerals, chemicals, or biological contaminants can exponentially reduce that range, but these low frequency radios penetrate water quite well. And when I say low frequency, I'm talking about 75 megahertz in North America or 40 megahertz over in Europe. And I believe they also in Australia use 40 megahertz as well. Unfortunately, when everybody started putting 2.4 gigahertz radios in all of their boats and planes and cars, the radio manufacturers like, what am I doing making these low frequency radios? Nobody's buying them anymore. We're just going to stop. So there are no manufacturers out there offering new low frequency radios. So the only option, if you want to go that route, is like eBay or like clearance shelves on old hobby stores, if there's any hobby stores around anymore. Or hitting up, old Joe, 80-year-old Joe Blow who has a cache of like 80, old radios sitting on the shelf in his shop in a cardboard box somewhere. So that's low frequency. On the other end of the spectrum is high frequency. And Dave Merriman, again, was one of the first people to kind of embrace this, seeing the writing on the walls. He did up an excellent article talking about the implementation of high frequency radios in RC submarines. And a big shout out to Ed Tortle, who really kind of embraced that and did another excellent job in documenting that and pushing it through the forums. You can use 2.4 gigahertz radios in RC submarines if you relegate yourself to periscope depth to surface. So you will maintain control of your submarine so long as the antenna of the 2.4 gigahertz radio is protruding from the surface of the water. If you go an inch under the surface, you will lose signal. And you're going to be relying on your fail-safe system to pop it back up again. Not as big a deal as you may think, okay, before everybody gets their shorts in a knot. If you got a bigger boat and you're operating in what I like to call black water scenarios, this is where, like, if it's more than 20 or 30 feet away, you can't see the part of your boat that's under the water, okay? You are not ever going to want to operate your boat where you can't see it in an unknown body of water where there could be fishing line and shopping carts and weeds and logs and all sorts of fun things under the surface of the water. So operating at periscope depth and limiting yourself to that depth is an excellent idea if you want to return home with a boat on the stand. Just saying, okay? So 2.4 is absolutely viable. What we've started playing with a lot more, and this is on the heels of the implementation in the airplane world, is using a medium frequency, 900 megahertz. At a high enough output wattage, you can get good water penetration. Will it be as good as 75 megahertz or 40 megahertz? No, but it'll be plenty deep for you to get into trouble. 3, 4, 5, 6 feet, no problem. These radios will transmit at up to a watt of power, whereas most conventional low frequency radios is more like 200 milliwatts or 250 milliwatts. Okay, so you're broadcasting at like quadruple the power to make up for the inefficient transmission of the radio waves through the water. The other kind of neat thing about this is the radio systems that like I'm offering right now and a few other manufacturers actually called tandem radios. So they will broadcast not only on the 900 megahertz frequency, but also on 2.4. So you have two antennas, one in your boat for when the boat is submerged, and another one and an antenna in the periscope or mast. So basically, so long as you can see that periscope, you can go as far away as you can dream. We're talking like a mile line of sight kind of stuff here, people. But what happens when you submerge the boat, it immediately and without a hiccup flips over to the low frequency, and you can just maintain control of the boat when it is in submerged operations. So those are the three options really that are out there right now. I'm not going to go into like CB frequencies and all of these people they have to get like their ham radio license for. This is just not feasible for the average person, okay? Those are the three commercially available options that you're going to have to you that you're going to have a lot of support for within the hobby. The other neat thing about the new radio systems is you've got tremendous, incredible amounts of flexibility to program, mix, integrate fail-safes, have multiple receivers. Like it's only limited by your imagination, to be brutally honest with you. Also, there's a lot of really cool telemetry modules that you can install in your boat, including things like current draw, voltage of main drive battery. There's pressure sensors, GPS modules. There's tons and tons of things that are out there right now. How many channels do you need? So let's say you do hit up old Joe Blow and he says, oh, yeah, man, I've got, a 4-channel Airtronics from 1974 on the shelf there. Will that work for you? Short answer is yeah, it will. For an RC submarine, as a dynamic diver with no ballast system, you need a minimum of 3 channels: throttle, dive planes, and rudder. If you've got a ballast system, you need 4 channels. That's logical. You got those 3 channels plus your ballast system. Ideally, you want to have at least 5 because you'll be able to split up your forward and aft dive planes and get a little bit more realism when you operate your submarine. Now, there's very few radios that were commercially produced with 5 channels. Usually they're in 2-channel increments, right? 4, 6, 8, and then 9. I don't know how that works, but at any rate, so if you find a 4-channel radio, you're good. If you can find a 6-channel radio, you're better. Every additional feature that you add to your boat, periscopes, torpedoes, all of this stuff, you may want to think about this. Not that you're going to implement it for your first boat. We talked about this, but if you are ever thinking about implementing it in a boat, maybe you want to make an investment in a 10 or 12-channel radio now so that you have that flexibility when setting up your transmitter, now this is purely a matter of personal preference, okay? People coming from the airplane world will typically set things up similar to an airplane. So you have your throttle on your left stick, your rudder on your left stick, and then your dive planes on your right stick. I don't like that. I like having throttle on the left, and then on the right stick, dive planes and rudder. So basically the throttle is isolated on the left-hand side, and you're just driving it like like an airplane, I guess, with your right thumb on that stick. Now there's options out there. Ed Tortle he served on a submarine, and he's a big proponent of an annunciator. So he actually puts his throttle on a dial and puts his aft planes on the left stick, which is ratcheted, so he can set the angle on the rear dive planes to maintain perfectly level operation of his submarine. So this is a matter of personal preference. I'm not going to confuse you anymore about that, but typically the way that I would recommend to set it up, throttle left stick, rudders and dive planes on your right stick, okay? And then for your ballast system, I like a 3-position switch, and ideally it will be a spring return. So a momentary 3-position switch, ideally. If it's latching, it's not a big deal. But that way, if you're blowing ballast and you take your thumb off, it'll stop blowing ballast, as opposed to flicking the ballast, forgetting about it, and then eating up your battery or blowing all of your gas out because you forgot. All right. That was 48 minutes of high-speed talking. So now I'm gonna stop this share, and I am just going to open things up for Q&A for anybody that wants to ask questions. Just as a reminder, in theory, you're muted right now. So if you're talking and nobody's responding to you, if you hit your space bar, that should unmute, and then if you take your hand off, it should mute you again, in theory. So at this point, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. That was a lot to digest. I apologize if I skipped over something that was important to you, but now's your chance to clarify.
Bob, Fred here. When you first sent me my parts to put this thing together, I dove into the hull first and got back into the rudder and planes and started asking myself the question of how are these things going to hook up and how far will I go on making the control surfaces back there permanent. And I talked to you very quickly, and you said, start with the cylinder first. Build the cylinder, and then you can go ahead and mate it up to the hull. Say some more about that, though. You didn't give me enough whys.
And it's a matter of personal preference. You know, for some people, the cylinder can be intimidating, and so working on the hull can feel a little bit more less intimidating, more comfortable. Ease into things. It's not like it's going to be the end of the world if you do it the other way around. My reasoning is this: the cylinder is the heart and soul of your submarine. Okay. Once you get that set up, you're going to know precisely where the outputs are for your linkages. You're going to know exactly where your shaft is going to line up for your drivetrain. All of these are very important things to know before you start putting bulkheads and spacers and, linkage rods and that kind of thing in your hull. So the way that I like to do it is I get the cylinder all set up and working perfectly all by itself. Scratch it off. Then you can actually take your empty hull, put your cylinder in it, and then you can start wrapping your brain about, okay, now I got to put a spacer in here. I got to lift it up to the middle of the boat. Okay, I got to build, some saddles. Step 1 done. Step 2, where do I put it? Left and right. You can get that done in there. So it's a matter of personal preference. Based on my experience, I would start with the cylinder and then work your way towards the finishing of the hull. The other thing is people will sometimes get carried away in building their hull, and they paint it up and they weather it and it all looks perfect and beautiful, and then they start putting cylinders and bulkheads and they're scratching everything up and they're beating it and they're flipping it and it's falling off workbenches. Better that happens when it's a bare hull than after you've got it all dressed up. In my mind, that should be occurring last. Obviously, all the control surfaces, those are the most delicate parts of your boat. So let's leave them for as far as towards the end of the project as we can get it.
Thanks. And the rest of your overview I thought was outstanding. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
That was my question too. I think I've bit off more than I can chew to start with, and so I was back to what should I do first, and so I really appreciate that comment.
There's a saying from my old place of work, and you've heard me use it before in theory if you guys know me. When you think about this, you know, let's see, you got to eat an elephant, and you look at the elephant, you're like, oh my God, I can't eat this elephant. But how do you eat the elephant? It's one bite at a time. So my advice to you, don't look at it as like, oh my God, I got to build an RC submarine. You look at it as saying, you know what? Step one, I'm going to unbox everything and I'm going to lay it out so it's all organized. And that's going to be step one. Step one is complete. It's like, I'm a checklist first. Like, check. Oh, yeah. I got a check mark on my list. That feels really good. And then you can move on to step number two. You know, I'm gonna install my speed controller, right?
Yep. Yeah, this is gonna help me regroup already because you went through what I need to do with my cylinder and how to situate it. And now I know, quit messing around trying to make this damn retractable bow planes and just put the cylinder in the boat, get it where I need it.
Yeah.
Then I'll know where my rods are going to go and some other things, and I can go to next step. So this, I think, is going to help me get on track.
And I have no problem, again, guys, if you want to allocate for that feature down the road, do it. You know, make sure that you can unbolt and move things around so you can get back in there afterwards, but don't worry about it now. You know, you're going to end up waking up in the middle of the night with like, oh, I could do this and that, and I'll have to do this, or just being frustrated and throwing it on the shelf, which is way worse because that's where it goes to die, right? And then I pick it up for about 5 cents on the dollar, and you feel bad about yourself.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
With regards to ballast tanks, my first boat, I kept it super simple because I didn't know what I was doing. I grabbed a Rick Teskey LA hull, and the ballast tank was just a model airplane fuel tank. That was the ballast tank, and I had a fuel pump that was out in the water, and I pumped water into the fuel tank. The air hose was up through the periscope, and the boat went down. And then I had it trimmed so that the periscope was just at the surface. I'm now building a Typhoon that I bought off you, and I want to put the ballast tank inside the watertight cylinder. Is that going to change the amount of water that I'm going to displace? Because the watertight cylinder doesn't change. It's still going to be 4 inches by whatever.
But you are changing the displacement because you're going to be displacing water with air through the utilization of your ballast system. So when you pump that air in or pump the water out, you're right. Changing the volume basically of the boat. So to back up here and to simplify things, there's no reason it won't work. The only reason that some people don't go with like a ballast tank in a cylinder, like a separate, is you lose a little bit of volume because you need to allocate for wall thickness in there. The R&R cylinder is a perfect example of that. He has a sealed ballast tank that goes in the exterior watertight cylinder section, but it absolutely works really, really well. So there's no reason that I can see that what you're talking about shouldn't work. You just need to allocate. When you do your ballast calculations, it needs to be off of the size of the actual ballast tank, not the diameter of the outer enclosure.
Oh, I have a kind of a specific question, I guess. I know you already know this, but I'm setting up my first sub, which is going to be the Thresher Permit Kit, the 1:96 scale. and I'm looking on your website right now, and I am just trying to figure out what a good first radio transmitter and receiver combo might be for something like that. And I obviously, you know, if I don't like it, I'll get something else. But just a recommendation, if you could.
Okay, so we talked about this before. You know, what'll work? You know, the $24 low frequency radio off of eBay. That'll work. But you gotta find it. You have to find it, and you need to trust that it will work. And then you need to be okay with the inherent challenges of these low frequency, older technology radios.
You're right.
So, speaking specifically as myself as a vendor, the only radio system that I'm currently offering right now is the FreeSky line of tandem radios.
Right, I see that.
Yeah, so they're expensive. I'm not going to mince words. You know, a complete setup will be between $350 and $400, or maybe even more, depending on what system you go. But these radios will do anything that you can imagine. So, like, it doesn't matter if it's your first boat with 4 channels or your 10th boat with 28 channels. This radio will handle all of that. So it's a bigger investment up front, but you will never outgrow the radio system.
Well, I've already accepted that I'm going to spend pretty much all of my free money on this for the foreseeable future. So,
okay.
I mean, if that is like a good investment long term, like the X18, does that just like what you know? Would that be something that you would recommend?
Yeah, that's more than adequate. That's like so. And by the way, for those of you who are following that FreeSky line of radios, they're actually discontinued the X18 and X20s, and they're going out to their like new radios, which I need to list and get up on my website right now. So the X18, it's perfectly fine. It'll do everything that you need it to do. For your boat, I would recommend just going with the simple R9SX receiver, which is 900 megahertz. You don't need to worry about tandems and running external antennas and all that crazy stuff. So that will absolutely get you going, and it will take care of anything that you need it to do.
Perfect.
Good afternoon. Do you mind if I ask a quick question about sealing a boat?
Yeah. When you say sealing, are you talking about sealing the watertight cylinder or like buttoning the hull up?
No, I'm actually talking about, I've printed the boat in PLA, which probably should have gone PETG, but
gotcha.
I'm wondering about, everything is said, you know, use epoxy to seal the hull itself, but I'm looking at it and saying, what if you were to use 405 UV rosin and cure it that way? It would flow into all the cracks and crevices a whole lot better. It's not that difficult to cure it. It's still messy. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes on this because this is like a higher level conversation, I think, than like entry level RC submarine stuff. But generally speaking, PLA plastic is perfectly fine as a material to build your RC submarine. Everybody's like, oh, it absorbs water, it's going to dissolve, and you're just going to have cylinder floating. No. I mean, guys, let's be realistic here. You put your submarines, we put our submarines in the water for half an hour, once every couple weeks. If you're an aggressive skipper, that plastic is not going to absorb like 1/1000th of a milliliter of water. This is not an issue by any stretch of the imagination. The thing you're going to have an issue with, and this is based off of my experience, and this is one of the first things Jason did. Where is he? I saw him here somewhere. There he is. It was one of the first things we did. We were sanding a Los Angeles hull we'd printed, and he left it outside. We went in to take a phone call, and when we came back outside, it had melted. PLA plastic is not thermally stable at lower temperatures. So if you've got a black hull sitting in a hot sun, it's going to get hot and it's going to just melt into an indescribable, heart-shattering mess. So it is perfectly fine. I've built PLA submarines before, but you're going to need to baby it. So if it's out, it needs to be in the shade. If it's in the car, I don't even know what you do if it was in the car. You need to make sure you don't leave it in a hot car. You know, cover it with a blanket, cover it with a towel, just baby that thing like no tomorrow, but you'll be fine. Don't worry about sealing it. If you're worried about striations and stuff like that, I just have good experience sanding it, filler primer, and you're done.
Okay. So PETG doesn't have the same problem?
What's that?
PETG is thermally more sound?
It's better. It's better. It can still get hot and it can still distort. Ideally, you want to go with ASA or ABS.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to throw this out, all my boats are strictly PLA, and I've got roughly 20 of them now. And I've done the interiors using this that I used to use when I was building airplanes. It works great, but like Bob says, you probably don't need it. But this stuff really goes on slick with a brush, and it will do a good job of sealing the inside of the boat.
It depends a lot too, guys. And again, I know I spent too much time on this already, but if you've got a hull that you've printed out and you've got all the scribe lines and all the safety rails and little hatches, if you slather that epoxy on, they're going to kill all that detail. So, you know, just bear that in mind. Sometimes just a little bit of sand or a little bit of primer will go a long way.
I strictly only seal the interior. I don't touch the exterior.
There you go. There you go. And you can mitigate a little bit that tendency to warp by laying up a layer of fiberglass on the inside, like epoxy fiberglass, and that'll create some structural rigidity to the boat as well.
Well, I'd like to ask a question, please.
Yes, sir.
This is my first attempt. I printed off your Hunley from your plans. It seems like it'd be a simple attempt, simpler relatively speaking. It printed off great. I did it off of liquid resin. I got being a modeler, I may have gotten a little ahead of myself. I put the hull together, bayonet style, the way the PDF suggested. Now, check my logic on this. I'm going as simple as I possibly, simple of a setup as I can think of. I think you've got a 2.5 EZ cylinder.
Yep.
So if I balance that, if I balance the hull out to where it's historically just almost decks awash, then just let it go, give it down planes until okay, you're going to kill me for the lack of vocabulary now. Until the air pipes are just barely sticking up over out of the water, and then if anything goes bad, and I can just kill the engine, and the buoyancy should bring it back up.
Yeah, but you know what? You brought up a super awesome point, and I'm glad you did it. Let's talk about ballasting your boat out. Okay, most everybody. I want to be able to stop my boat. I want to be able to dive down to the bottom, park it on the bottom, and go have lunch. I want to come back 20 minutes later, and I want to have it pop back up again, or I want to hover it, under the water and at 3 feet deep, and show all my friends and be super cool. There's nothing wrong with that, but negatively ballasting a submarine has some inherent risks associated with it. Okay. A full static diving submarine is going to allow the possibility of negatively ballasting your boat. We talked about buoyancy, negatively buoyant, so it's going to sink, right? Can you see what the problem with this is? If there's a problem, you are negatively ballasted. You are going to go all the way down. There is nothing to stop you. It will go all the way down. If you ballast your boat slightly positively, and I'm talking from the perspective of a new sub skipper, you have an inherent safety factor in your boat. All of my boats that I build are typically positively buoyant, just a whisper positively buoyant. This is a safety feature for operating your submarine, okay? Sure, you don't have that park it on the bottom and go for lunch factor. But if you're
Don't want
not
it.
building, if you're not building an SSBN and you don't need to hover 2 feet down to launch a ballistic missile out of the top, real submarines don't do that. They don't statically hover. You're never going to see a World War II fleet boat statically submerge to 50 feet and just hover there. That's what dive planes are for. You need to have water flow over them to maintain the attitude of the boat. Same thing with these submarines. So you may have the cool look at this factor, but from a realism perspective, it's not there. From a safety perspective, I would much rather sacrifice the static diving ability and go home with the boat on my stand than to say, oh, look how cool I am, and I dove and I hovered and I can make it do super cool things. That's just me. And I'm, again, speaking from a perspective, new beginner sub skipper. Let's be safe. Let's have fun. Let's make it simple and go home with a boat at the end of the day. So what he was talking about, for those of you who don't know, it's an easy driver. This was initially set up by David Merriman. There is no ballast system. This is called a dynamic diver. So you just ballast your boat. In your case with the Hunley, just the little towers, two little turrets would stick out of the water. Little forward stick on the throttle, little dive planes, down you go. Got into a problem, hands off the stick, up she comes.
Question?
Any more questions?
Yes.
Jim.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, going to go to the real newbie approach here because all this stuff is pretty advanced, but I've got plenty of RC experience as well as electronics. Is the Revell model system, like the Type 7C, the bigger model, is that easily modified to be a surface runner? Our lakes are green. There's no public pool. So surface running is the way that I'd have to go.
Yes. The Revell models are great. I'm a bigger fan of the Type 9 because it's a little bigger and you got more real estate to work with. The other good news about that, Jim, is the Type 9 in that same scale as the Type 7, but it's a bigger boat. It allows you to use our 2.5 Easy, which it has the motor, the servos, everything is all in there. You just drop it in, hook it up, and away you go. You could run it on the surface, but you could also ballast it as an actual submarine if you wanted to. But it would take care of all of the complications of the creation of a watertight enclosure, seals, motors, speed controllers, all of that would be addressed for you. Backing up, the Type 7 was a very, very popular boat. And again, shout out to David Merriman, created the 2-inch watertight cylinder subdriver that powered that particular boat. And he also came out with a conversion kit of resin conversion parts. Unfortunately, those product lines have been discontinued. So there's no products that are on the shelf right now for you to purchase to make it an easy, conversion for that to happen. Now, if you really wanted to go simple, Jim, as a surface runner, you could put a brushless motor in the wet. You could have a waterproof electronic speed controller. You could have a waterproof rudder. And the only thing you would need to seal up would be the receiver and the battery, maybe. Or you could even put a sealed lead acid battery in there of some kind or whatever. But there's lots of options. Surface runners, as compared to an RC submarine, are very, very simple. So it's very doable.
Okay. And the weight of the electronics, the battery, etc., would provide enough ballast for the model to balance properly in the water and not sink?
So we talked about wet hull versus dry hull. Basically, imagine poking holes all through that hull. It'd sink, right? If you had a boat and you poke holes in the bottom, it's going to sink. So imagine doing that with this boat, poking holes in the bottom. It's going to sink. What's going to provide buoyancy is the watertight enclosure that's going to be buoyant, and then you can put foam, closed cell foam strips in there that'll buoy it to the correct water line.
Okay. I just was trying to figure out how all that stuff would go inside the model, and therefore you would have some access if there was an issue to do any fixing and repairs, and that it would float properly so that water would never get into it. To begin with.
Again, I would go with this idea of a wet hull. The water gets everywhere, gets all in. The only thing that needs to be sealed are the delicate electronics. So your electronic speed you can even get waterproof electronic speed controllers, but your receiver, that's the most important thing. If that's dry, you can have the waterproof servo, the brushless motor, the battery, all of that can live in the wet part of the boat. The whole thing's full of water, and these things you just bolt them in there and connect the linkages, and you'll be good to go.
One last question real quick, if I could. For when I go to paint the boat, like I'm going to use, like a primer, auto primer, or whatever I can get. Once you do the decaling and stuff, is there something that you seal that all in, like some product that you use or prefer?
Yeah, I mean, clear coat, is the easiest and simplest solution.
Okay, just like rattle can clear coat stuff.
I have no problem using rattle cans. David hates rattle cans because there's no consistency to them. And there's no extensive quality control.
Right.
If you really, really, really want to do a super ultra professional job like David Merriman, who we should all aspire to be, you need to go to like an auto supply store, get like a 2-part paint, get an airbrush and like airbrush it in. But you can do a really cool job with rattle cans. I'm just saying. I have an airbrush.
I have an airbrush for like modeling. I was just wondering more like what the specific product, if there was one that you found is better or worse over time.
You've got a simple boat. You've got a permit class submarine. It is black, it is red, and that's it. We're not talking about color matching and ultra weathering and stuff like that. Especially for your first boat, I would say you can get away with a rattle can paint job. Now there's technique to it. Don't just hose it down, with paint, but you can do a pretty cool job just with rattle cans.
Yeah. Okay.
And seal it. So back to your question, decals and or dry transfers, and then seal it with clear coat. And for God's sake, people, listen to me. Do not make your submarine gloss. It's terrible. It makes it look like a $10 Chinese toy. When you're like, I don't care if the actual full-sized boat is shiny. When you zoom out, right? We're talking scale here. That gloss goes away. So if you want to go a little shiny, okay, satin finish, but like flat finish works just as well. Don't paint it gloss. I will come through the monitor and beat you to death with your microphone.
I got one more question.
All right, last chance for questions.
One more question?
Yep.
Do you prefer water pumps or air pumps for ballast systems?
They both work the same way. They're just pumping a different medium. It mostly depends on what kind of access you have. Your cat's tail is freaking me out. That looks like a freaking worm right in the corner of the screen.
He wants food.
They both work exactly the same. But one is just moving air and one is just moving water. Now, typically, you're not going to find a two-way air pump, but you can find two-way water pumps. So it depends on what system you got going. If it's like a high-pressure water system, like the OTW variant, where you're using a windshield washer pump, so which would be like a gear pump or a wobble pump that they're called, that's perfect for water. Air pumps are typically one direction. Yeah. So you need to bear that in mind. So you would have to vent the air out and then pump the air in. Whereas with a water pump system, you can have one pump to pump out and in. So it's just different. It depends on what you've got set up and where your comfort level is and what you got available and what you found and all that fun stuff. Windshield washer pumps, by the way, off Amazon, super cheap, two-way gear pump, pumps water two directions. They're like $15 or something like that. So just to let you know, we'll throw it out there for you guys if you need to find a cool two-way water pump, high pressure. Well, I really appreciate everybody coming out. This has been a lot of fun. These are great questions. Hopefully we get, you know, some new skippers out of this equation. And I can't stress enough, we have a great time at our DiveTribe meetings, guys. I know it sounds like I'm flogging my DiveTribe membership, but like I'm not going to retire off of $10 a year. So it's worth it to come, and we have a great time. We make fun of each other. We share projects. We share updates. As a DiveTribe member, you'll get first crack at like new listings and stuff that I have. So just think about it. It's a small investment. We have a lot of fun, and it's your chance, especially at these like early formative times in your RC submarine career, to have the undivided attention of a panel of like a dozen or more experienced RC submariners out there who would love to help you with your projects. So bear that in mind. Okay. Well, with that, we're going to let you go. You guys have an awesome rest of your weekend. It was good to see you, and hopefully we see you again soon. Later.